Welcome to the Adventures of Andrew Briggs. My name is Andrew, and these are my adventures. This is a podcast about the places I go, the people I meet, the things I see, and some of the lessons I learn along the way. So hop in, and let's go. Hey, welcome to episode 5. So I'm back home, and I'm back to recording. The last time I recorded was in North Carolina, and I live in Washington State, so I've gone a lot of miles since then. From North Carolina, I headed up the East Coast, and the most north I made it was to Maine. I made it to the southeast point of Maine, and from there, I started to head west, back in the direction of home. I saw a lot of points along the way. One of the first big points was Niagara Falls. I went through Michigan, which I really liked. I went through Minnesota, which I didn't really like. I went through the Badlands, which I'm actually drinking out of a Badlands mug right now. After that, I went up to North Dakota, then down to Yellowstone, and I spent the last month exploring Washington and spending time with family, and then ending with a family reunion, which was great as always. In total, I hit 40 states on this trip. I went about 40,000 miles, went to 25 national parks, and I was in the van for just over a year, somewhere around 380 days. And at this point, the van is already sold. Someone actually flew up from Southern California to buy it, and I don't tell her, but I actually sold it for $2,000 more than I bought it for, which ended up working out well. And it's nice being home, getting back to a more stable, healthy routine, getting back into shape, but there's also a sense of freedom and newness that I miss. You know, being able to wake up every day in a new spot and see new things every day. It's definitely, I have to find new ways in my life to still have that interaction. But now that I don't have that direct relationship with that newness, I need to find new avenues in my life in order to make that possible. And when I got back into Washington, I met up with my friend Ramon in Spokane, and he asked me, like, what's one sentence you could sum up this trip with? And me being me, I didn't have one sentence at the time. I would need to take some time to get the words exactly right. But the first word that came to mind was endure, or endurance. You know, because things that are challenging, it's easy to complain. It's easy to quit. But when you're out there doing something like this, you don't have that option. Your only choice is to continue moving forward. And complaining or quitting doesn't really get you anywhere. So I think that's something that I picked up along this trip. I guess time will tell to see if that's really embedded itself into me and ingrained in me as I move forward. But that was definitely the first thing that came to mind. There was a quote that I wanted to read, actually, that's in reference to this that came to mind recently. It goes, no, man, you got to keep going. What am I going to do, quit? That's not an option. You got to keep on keeping on. Life's a garden. Dig it. And you got to make it work for you. You never give up, man. That's my philosophy. And that is by the wise, great American philosopher Joe Dirt, if you're feeling classy. And I like that, where, you know, it's not about, quitting is not an option. It's only about moving forward and continuing, putting your head down, nose to the grindstone, and continue moving forward. And finding your garden and cultivating that garden and growing it and making it work for you in the way that you possibly can. So I enjoyed that quote, and, you know, the wisdom of Joe Dirt is enduring. Also, now that I'm back home, I do have access to a lot more photos and videos that I didn't have access to before through my GoPro and through the nicer camera that I have. So if you're listening to this, maybe swap over to the YouTube version. Might be a little bit more entertaining and informative if you can see some photos and videos of what was going on at the time. So this episode, I initially planned on doing 2 episodes about Utah. But I've thought about Utah and talked about Utah so much that I'm done talking about Utah. I'm done thinking about Utah. So I'm going to finish Utah in this episode. I'm going to talk about 2 of the other national parks I went to, a few of the slot canyons, and a few smaller places in southern Utah that I explored. And I'm going to end this episode talking about my experience with bugs and insects and kind of how that changed over time. So first off, in the last episode, I talked about going to Bryce Canyon. That was the first national park I went to, and it set the bar pretty high, because the second one I went to was Arches. And I wasn't let down by arches. Not like it wasn't a great park. I had an awesome time. I had a smile on my face nearly the whole time. But still, Bryce set that bar pretty high. I camped out at some BLM land just west, some free camping land there, just west of the park. I did some grocery shopping and stopped at a dispensary in Moab. There was a lot of construction going on at the time, so it was a little difficult to navigate the town, but I was able to go down and see the powerful Colorado River, which I heard in some old Johnny Cash songs, which was cool. What else? I mean, the park itself, there's a lot to see. I didn't know if there's going to be like 2 or 3 arches, but there's a ton of different arches. There's hikes to short, stumpy ones, and there's high ones that are long and thin, and there's a bunch of different ones. One of my favorite ones was the double arch, and actually when I got up to the double arch, I was taking photos with this guy that I met, Silas, and some lady came up to me and she's like, "Were you that goat that I saw jumping on all the rocks back there with a big smile on his face?" I'm like, yeah, that must have been me. That's kind of what I was doing, was just, rather than taking the normal path, like just climbing on all the rocks on the side and kind of just exploring and, yeah, making my own path like a goat would do. Which kind of, it made it more fun. And I also got out, right before I left Arches, the morning before I took off, I went back because I wanted to check this thing off my list, which was longboard through a national park. So I found this nice curve downhill and cruised my longboard through the park as well, which was a blast. After that, I headed back in the direction of Cannonville where I was living, and I continued to do work on the small home I was building. Normally my schedule was Monday to Friday, but what I would do to go explore a park is I would work Monday to Saturday, and then the next week I would take an extra day off. So that's what I did going down to Zion National Park, which was the next one that I went to. Zion is definitely one of my most highly recommended parks in the country that I went to. It's awesome. I mean, even driving through Zion is great. You hardly even need to get out and do any hiking to appreciate its beauty. I would definitely suggest getting out and doing hiking. You'll get the more full experience, but even the drive-through is great. And you're driving through these tunnels and switchbacks through this huge canyon. It's beautiful. Every turn you take, there's another nice sight to see. One of the spots I got out to take a photo, this was kind of a bummer, and I had my lens cap in my lap, and I stood up, and it fell onto the ground and started rolling across the parking lot, and someone was pulling into the spot right next to me, and they drove over the lens cap as it was rolling and snapped it in half, which was too bad. And now it still works, but I kind of have to have the lens cap in a specific position or it kind of collects more dust than it does keep it off, so it still works, I guess. But something that was more of a bummer was one of the most iconic hikes there. It's called Angel's Landing. And when I was there, they thought it'd be wise to close it down for coronavirus reasons because it's a small trail that with like this chain that gets you all the way up to the top of this huge panoramic view. And I wasn't able to go on that one because they were afraid that the trail was too thin. They didn't want people getting less than 6 feet or whatever. So that was closed, which was kind of a bummer. But since that was closed, I did have more time to go into the Narrows, which is the other spot in Zion. It's like the other well-known spot in the area. So in order to get up to the Narrows, I was down at the parking lot at the bottom, and you have to take a trolley up to the top, and they were all sold out of their tickets because, again, coronavirus stuff. They were limiting the amount of tickets they were selling, and they had some online sales or online way that you were supposed to go buy the tickets, which I didn't know, and I didn't do that. So I wandered around for an hour trying to find someone that had tickets, eventually finding some lady that had 4 of them, and I bought those from her, gave 3 of them away, and then took the trolley up to the top. I then hiked back in the Narrows, 2 or 3 miles back into it probably. And through here, you're going to be walking through ankle to shin deep water. There's a few spots that get deeper you can swim in, but for the most part, you're going to be walking through pretty shallow waters. And they do have, so I would suggest bringing some shoes that can handle the water. And flip-flops is not the ideal shoe in this situation. They do have walking sticks there if you need it. It should make it a little easier as well. But a lot of beautiful sights, and you can take all these different routes through the Narrows, and you can go really deep into this canyon. But when I came back from the Narrows, I was like, it's just an in and back trail. So when I got back, I was at the bus stop again, and there was a ton of people waiting in line to go, take the bus back down to the bottom. So rather than waiting in line, I decided to walk down. Like I knew there was a bunch more bus stops along the way, but I figured I'd walk 3 or 4 stops down and then take the bus from there. And I'm so glad I did this because I was the only one that I saw doing this. So I was walking through a national park completely by myself, right in the middle of the wilderness. And yeah, you're walking through a huge canyon with beautiful trees and a river and deer all over the place. It was an interesting thing at this point because they had recently put in a new asphalt road with some sharp yellow lines, like this dark black asphalt. And the contrast between the road and the wild wilderness around it was kind of an interesting thing to see. I even got to see a little bit of the sunset through there. Just so many beautiful viewpoints around there. Every little corner you walk around is a new viewpoint. And these deer, they'll come right up to you. Not right up to you. They're a little more skittish than that. They won't eat out of your hand, but they'll get close to you. They're not afraid. So yeah, again, Zion was one of my most highly recommended parks. And if you want any specific hikes to check out, when you get there, they'll give you a map and you can ask some people around about which ones that are the best ones to take. It was even more of a tease because the week after I left, they opened up Angel's Landing again, which was a bummer. But I was happy to still be able to go see a lot of the Narrows. So back near Canyonville, a couple of the slot canyons I went to. One of them was called Zebra Slot Canyon. This one was near the city of Escalante. You take this road, like Hole in the Wall or Hole in the Rock Road, this gravel road, a few miles out. There's a parking lot right in the middle of nowhere, and you kind of walk on this open trail way back to a rock quarry, and eventually you get to a spot that you can walk into this canyon. This is a very small canyon. And you start walking in. At some point, you get up to a spot where the water is about waist deep, and there's little dead frogs or dead fish floating in there. And at some points, this canyon gets so thin at the bottom of it that you have to shimmy your way up a little higher and kind of climb your way back. This was one of the spots. This was the spot that I was hoping to get this sort of imagery in Utah. This was one of the images that I'd seen on the internet that I was really hoping to find, because it's this sort of canyon that you can stand at one end of it, and it curves back and forth so sharply that you can't see straight through it. And the stone here, the reason why they call it Zebra Slot Canyon is because the stones are striped like a zebra. They're not black and white. They're different shades of orange and yellow, but the same sort of pattern. So I was happy to check this one off of the list also. I'm glad that I made it out to that one. Another one that's more accessible to more people is Willis Creek Narrows. It's another slot canyon. I couldn't get my van all the way to the parking lot because there was this hill, like this sandy hill that I wasn't able to get up. So I had to leave my van on the side of the road there for a while, which added on about an extra mile or so onto the walk, but that was all right. This one was interesting, I thought, because it's a lot wider. You can walk through it easily, no problem. There's a smaller creek coming through and some waterfalls. But the thing that was interesting about this one was as you're walking through it, it kind of felt like you were walking through a skeleton or you're walking through a spinal cord or something. Just the way that these stones were carved out was really unique. And this is not a loop trail, but I kind of made it a loop trail. I got way down to the end of the canyon and I took a left, and I knew the general direction I wanted to go, where the van was. So I kind of just started wandering in that direction and making my own trail again. I had some sunflower seeds out there also that was keeping my energy up. So yeah, I had a good time just kind of, again, wandering out in the middle of nowhere by myself. I like being out that far away from everything. A little closer to Cannonville, there was a city right nearby called Tropic, and they have a reservoir there, and I went over and did some fishing. This is the only spot on the trip that I caught a fish. It was not an exciting fight. I kind of just casted it out, and he took a bite, and then he swam to shore. Basically hopped in my lap. Not an exciting fight, but I was still stoked to catch a fish, and he was kind of too small to really keep, so I just threw him back, and I know a lot of those throwback fish don't make it. He kind of probably just went back to the circle of life, but that's the way it goes. Another spot that was smaller that was interesting around here was Kodachrome State Park. A few of the spots that were interesting here was one of the things that was this place they called Indian Cave. What was cool here was they had this clay wall where people over the years had ran their hands over and over in this certain spot and had worn grooves into the clay, and you kind of put your hands into it. So that was kind of an interesting thing there. Another spot was a place called Cool Cave. So I went in there to try to become more cool. I went in and did some b-boy poses and was doing my cool poses, and then I realized the reason it's called Cool Caves because when you go in there, the temperature is like 10 or 15 degrees colder. I guess that makes more sense. There's a lot of other spots here that had nice panoramic views as well. But that was more, it's a state park, so it's not a national park. It's a little less grand, but still, I think worth the time over at Kodachrome. And if you have any more specific questions about things in southern Utah, if you find this recently when this comes out, or you find this in a few years, if you ever want to reach out about information or places to see in southern Utah, let me know, because I stayed there for over 2 months and was able to explore quite a few different little areas. But around this area is Butch Cassidy's childhood home. There's a place called Mossy Cave right off the highway, a nice little hike with a nice waterfall. Drove over a place called Hell's Backbone with a beautiful view. There's a remote campsite at a lake called LeBaron Lake on top of this hill that was wonderful. Nice hikes to waterfalls. I went on a bunch of random little back roads and on back hikes. There was even spots that I definitely took the van in places that it shouldn't have been. This 2-wheel drive Chevy camper van. And there are certain times that kind of when I would know I was on a road I shouldn't be on is when the van is swaying back and forth so hard that my cabinets are flying open, all my food's flying onto the floor. That's when I know it's probably time to turn around. And in order to mitigate that problem, I just have to take everything out of my cabinets and put it on the floor. But yeah, I explored a lot of places around here, and there's a lot of free camping, a lot of nice hiking. So if you have any questions, please reach out at any time. There was 2 other things I did want to do before I left southern Utah. There were these hills that I was driving on every day that I wanted to longboard down, so I got my longboard out and checked that off the list. And then the last thing I wanted to do was go horseback riding. So up near Bryce Canyon, they have Bryce Canyon City right near the entrance of the park that's where I do a lot of grocery shopping. They have Ruby's Inn, they have a rock shop, they got an ice cream parlor, and a bunch of tourist little things. So horseback riding was one of them. So I went and did that. I rode a mule, which is like a donkey horse, so it's not really like a horse. It's not really a horse. So hopefully someday I want to ride a glorious stallion, but it was still cool riding a mule. From what I've heard is the reason they use mules is because they're less skittish around steep cliffs, and Bryce Canyon has a lot of those, so that's kind of why they stick with them. And I had a really great time doing that. It was another thing that was nice to check off the list. But someday I'm going to ride a glorious stallion, grow my hair out super long, get ripped. Oh, it's going to be fantastic. It's a great image. The last thing I want to talk about on this episode was my interaction with bugs. So in Utah, this was the first time that I found a new bug I needed to figure out, and I needed to change the way that I reacted to bugs, because normally the reaction with bugs is to, once you feel something crawling on you, is to kind of freak out and react and to smack it off as fast as you can. And what I learned was that's not the best technique of going about it, because if it's something like a tick, if you try to smack him off real fast and then he falls off and you can't find him, that's not good, because he might find his way back to you. You have to find him, deal with him right then. So I noticed that when I was working on the small home, I was feeling these little pinpricks on my arm and on my neck, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I thought it was, I thought it was an adjustment to the new diet that I was eating. Maybe my body was purging some toxins or something, because I was eating all local meats and vegetables they grow. It was all healthy food, so that's what I thought it was at first. But then I realized, rather than smacking it, I stopped and looked really closely, and I saw this tiny little gnat that was biting me. And then I looked a little closer, and I could see on the wood that I was working on that there was a small swarm of all these things. Like, okay, now I see what this is. So those ones are easy to deal with. I just put on another flannel, and for the most part, stopped bothering me. But there was a few other times I wanted to talk about that sometimes the bugs just overpower you, and there's not a lot you can do, really. You definitely get more comfortable being around bugs and interacting with them the more you do, but still sometimes they overpower you and they get the best of you. Nature will do that. One of the spots that got worse, that was not fun, was, and if you hear me talk about in person, you hear me talk about Minnesota, you know it's not one of my favorite states. It's not the people I met. Everyone that I met there was great. I love the people that I met. But it was everything else about the state I did not enjoy. And one thing that was all right was they did have a decent amount of camping. But when I would go camping, I'd go out into the woods or into the forest, and I'd collect the wood for the fire. And then I'd get my fire started. I'd sit down next to the fire, and then I wouldn't move. I'd just sit there and see if I could feel anything crawling on me. And more times than not, I would. And I'd pull my pant leg up, and I would see 1, 2, or 3 ticks crawling on my ankle. So then I had to grab my flashlight, pull my pants down to my ankles, And now I'm standing in the middle of the woods at night, bending over, shining this flashlight in all the little nooks and crannies, trying to make sure no tick hid in some spot that I don't want him. In total, this time through Minnesota, I was going through for probably about 2 weeks, and I had to take off 25 to 30 ticks off of me. Only one ever got embedded, and the one that got embedded, you know when you're sitting down, you lean forward a little bit, you got that fat roll on your side? Yeah, that's where he got embedded. And what I thought it was, okay, bear with me through this bug stuff. Some of it gets a little gross, so here we go. I thought it was, like I walked into the forest and a stick had poked me, and that was a scab or something. That's what I thought it was. I didn't look at it, I just felt it. So the next morning I woke up, I felt it again, and I felt the same. So then I looked at it for the first time, and I saw, it's a tick that was embedded in there, just dug his way in. And I didn't use any fire, any chemicals to get him out or anything like that. I just tried to use some pliers and pull him out. And sure enough, as it goes, his barbed schnoz, his nose, his straw got stuck in there. So I had to dig at it. I was trying to dig at it, trying to get it out. And it started, it starts bleeding. And so I had to let that scab heal up a little bit, pull that off, get the pliers on it again, and pull that barbed hose out of there. So that was done to deal with, and just the amount of them, they were all over the place. And I did do a little bit of research because I wanted to understand, where are they finding me? How are so many getting on me? And what I did find was where ticks are hiding out. Like, ticks are not an aggressive. They're not aggressive. They're not trying to. They're not gonna wait on leaves and trees and jump on you or anything like that. They're not waiting for that. They're passive, and what they do is they sit on the edge of blades of grass. And they wait for something to walk by. They wait for someone or something to walk by they can cling on to. They just have their little sticky feelers out. And when something goes by, they cling to it. And that's their new home. And yeah, you want to deal with ticks. What I would be doing, I would be pulling them off. I have my pants around my ankles with the flashlight. I'd have to pull them off, and I'd immediately throw them into the fire. Because that is the way to deal with ticks. Those things do not die easily. And they're nasty little buggers. Also in Minnesota, that was part of the reason why I'm bitter towards Minnesota, is because I got stuck there twice. And one of the times that I got stuck, there was another bug thing, was they had tons of mayflies all over the place, and big ones. I got mayflies at home, but not this size. And, when I'm stuck, I'm going back and forth from digging the tires out to trying to drive out. And I have to leave the door open so that I can keep moving. I can move back and forth quickly. And within a minute or two, there's hundreds of these mayflies inside of the van. And there are thousands of them. They're all over the place. And they're big ones, too. They were nasty. So I did not have a good experience with the bugs there. But the one that was probably the worst out of all of them was when I was in Florida. I went to the Everglades. And I was staying in the campsite in the Everglades. And I met this cool old dude from across the street there that was staying in the park also. He had an RV, and he had this cool vehicle that was painted up like Jurassic Park. A little electric bike he let me cruise around on, which was real fun. A little fancy little machine. And, I talked with him a little bit. That night I had a bonfire, and it seemed like, I thought just flies were landing on my ankle all night, so I would just kind of brush them off with my other foot, and whatever. It wasn't a big deal. Next morning I woke up, and I had over 100 bites all over my ankles. And I was like, oh my gosh, those mosquitoes got me bad last night. That's what I told the guy across the street. And he's like, no, it wasn't the mosquitoes that got you, it was the chiggers. And I was first initially like, whoa, man, you gotta be careful. Someone's gonna try to cancel you for that nowadays. But then I realized there were these mites. It's these tiny little bugs, itty bitty tiny little bugs. And I've heard a bunch of different things of what they do. So I looked into it a little bit recently, and what I found, again, this is kind of a nasty thing, but what they do is they're these tiny little mites, and they get onto you, and they put their saliva or this enzyme into you, and it kills your skin, and they feed on your skin, and they drop off to mature to evolve to the next level. And at that point, they're no longer a worry for humans, I guess, but that's the way that they, continue to grow, is by feeding on your flesh, on my flesh, on whoever's flesh they can. There's a few different ways I've heard you can deal with it. I didn't do anything with it. I dealt with it the way I deal with a lot of things on my body. I just waited for it to go away. And it was bad when I woke up. The itching was It was noticeably worse than mosquitoes, and maybe it was worse just because there was so many in close proximity. Everything was so close. It was all condensed that it just felt really intense. But in the morning, I'd wake up, say I'm sleeping in a Walmart parking lot, and I put my sandals on to go inside, use the restroom. And as soon as you start moving, those sandals start scratching those bites. They start itching them up. It opens them up a little bit, and now your feet are itching like crazy. And I'm sitting in the back of Walmart in their bathroom, just scratching my ankles over and over. And I know I shouldn't be scratching them, but it feels so good to scratch it. And when you stop scratching it, you're just being tortured. It is not a fun experience dealing with chiggers. Definitely something I would say be aware of if you are in the Florida area. I'm sure they're around other places too, but that was one of my worst interactions. And again, you do get used to being around bugs. I definitely am more comfortable, but there's certain times that bugs are just going to get the best of you. That's the way that it works sometimes. It is better to be prepared though. But I am definitely more comfortable with bugs. I don't know about spiders. I don't know if I'll ever be friends with. Well, I don't know. Actually, there was a spider that I let live in the van with me for a while. There was two little tiny spiders I saw battling in the back. So I killed one of them and I left the other one alive, and now I made a new friend. So he hung out with me for a few weeks and we drove along together. At this point, I had spent 69 days in Utah and I was getting ready to go. They kept trying to add things to the list that I was doing, because I think they were enjoying the work that I was doing, having me there. So they kept trying to add on more and more, even though that wasn't part of the deal. It started to get a little bit emotional, a little overly emotional in the home. Obviously, nothing that I was causing, but just to be around the intensity of it all just got to be a little much. So I was ready to move on. And also, at this point, I'd only traveled down the West Coast for a week. I stopped in Vegas, and then I'd spent 2 months in southern Utah. So now I'm going to be taking off, and I'm actually going to be starting the van trip by myself, moving fast, living in the van only, because at this point I was living in the basement for the most part. So now, in some sense, the trip really begins, like the adventure of going out by myself and being in a new place every day. And that's where I'm going to continue the next episode of this podcast. Other than that, if you have any questions, you want to reach out for any reason, the best spot will probably be on Instagram. I made a page for this podcast at Adventures of Andrew B. If you find that, send me any questions or comments, and you can keep your concerns if you have them. Other than that, I appreciate you taking time to listen to this. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.